The Anbernic RG405M was undoubtedly one of the most popular handhelds of 2023, and for good reason. There's a lot to love here, from a beautiful all-metal shell, Anbernic's usual high-quality buttons, to the tiny, almost pocketable design. It's also still to this day one of the most powerful handhelds that has a retro-focused 4:3 aspect ratio display, along with the tried and tested Unisoc T618 processor. And yet the 405M is not quite the perfect handheld, and definitely comes with its own fair share of drawbacks. But the big question is the Anbernic RG405M still worth it in 2024 and beyond? Before we get into that, let's talk the spec list. As I just mentioned, the RG405M sports the Unisoc T618 processor, along with its Mali G52 GPU. This should be good up to a little bit of GameCube and PS2, but don't get your hopes up too high. That processor is paired with a 4-inch 4:3 aspect ratio display that has a resolution of 640 by 480 pixels. It has 4GB of LPDDR4X RAM, a 4500 mAh battery, Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 5 on board, dual stereo speakers, a 3.5mm headphone jack, a single SD card slot alongside 128 gigs of onboard memory, USB-C for power and peripherals, and ships with an Android operating system. The price of the RG405M in 2024 varies wildly from time to time and place to place. I've seen it for as cheap as around $130 on AliExpress, and I've seen it as expensive as $250 on various reseller websites. Anbernic's own website seems to fluctuate somewhere between $150 and $180. By the way, this handheld was sent to me for review by GoGameGeek. I've worked with them a bit in the past and I think they're a pretty good reseller. So if you're so inclined and you want to check out the RG405M, please go ahead and check their link out in the description box below. But rest assured that they've had no influence on the content of this video. In fact, at the time of posting this, they still don't know I'm even working on it. So let's take a look at the device itself. For me personally, I can't describe the overall design of this handheld as anything less than pretty much perfect. It is a stunning device that is compact, minimal, and beautiful. The black color especially is sublime, with a stealthy and refined look. And the only color that you're going to find on the front is the subdued face buttons, but everything else is pure and dark and melts away behind a colorful screen. Around the back, things are a little bit more industrial, with metal bolts, etched information, and rubber feet. Something very noticeable about the RG405M is that it is tiny, with a lower overall profile than a typical smartphone, other than maybe the thickness. And it's definitely one of the most compact yet powerful devices available right now. On the front you'll see a typical gamepad layout, but note that these analog sticks are Hall sensor analogs. Along the top you'll find inline shoulders, a heat radiation vent, although there's no active cooling here, a power LED, USB port, volume keys, and a power button. And along the bottom there are two speaker grills, your 3.5mm headphone jack, and an SD card slot. The absolute top-notch quality of this build is undeniable, and it just exudes class with this dark metal case. I might even call this one of the, if not the most beautiful devices I've held yet. It looks really sharp and really nice, all thanks to this metal shell. However, unfortunately the metal shell isn't entirely a boon for the 405M. In fact, I'd say it's far from it, and it causes a couple of annoying issues. The first problem is on the face buttons, because the plastic of the button actually scrapes against the metal of the plastic, and so as you can see here there are scratch marks all over the sides of the buttons, which really takes away from the quality premium look of this device, which is arguably one of its most important characteristics. The next problem is that it is heavy, very, very heavy for its size, at around 265 grams. And this heavy weight is incredibly noticeable. Because of how compact and small this device is, your hands kind of come together close, and all of that weight is going to be on your wrists directly, and this can get pretty tiring after a while. I have much bigger and much heavier devices that feel way lighter than this, because the weight is more balanced and your grip is more wide. With a wider grip like on the Odin 2, most of the weight is actually carried by your shoulders instead. Anyway, the RG405M is just starkly heavy for its size. It's not the end of the world, and I'm still happy to play it for long periods of time, it's just something I noticed. The other problem is that it is sensitive to ambient temperature. Here in the UK's cold January and February, the shell can become incredibly cold during the night, Anyway, this isn't the end of the world, but it can be positively icy when I go to pick it up, which has given me pause on more than one occasion. Thankfully, it does warm up while you're playing it, which staves off the icy feeling. I do really love the metal shell on the 405M, and I think it gives the device a character that very few other retro handhelds have, along with a perception of quality that is just the same. But I think in reality, if there was a plastic version of this instead, I would prefer that, just because it would get rid of the excess weight and the cold temperatures, and hopefully there wouldn't be so much scratching of the buttons. But anyway, now let's go ahead and talk about the controls. The RG405M's controls are the same top quality as the rest of the handheld. The analog sticks aren't the Nintendo Switch type, but they are compact and they feel great. They're recessed into the case to help keep things very pocketable, and I think these are a pretty good choice for a compact handheld, or at least they were at the time of release before the new Retroid sticks were around. And they work well enough, although they do seem to snap to cardinal directions and diagonals a little bit too much. It's definitely not the worst case that I've seen, but it is a little noticeable in games. Also, there's no anti-friction here at all, so when you rotate the stick at its limit, it's just kind of scratching against the metal case. And there's definitely a lot of friction there. Also, for some reason my stick has a weird clicky noise when it's rotated, but whatever, it's fine. The face buttons are membrane based and they feel absolutely great. They have a nice size and a glossy shape and they look honestly premium. The only problem here is how the buttons scuff against the case like I mentioned earlier. But other than that, I'd say these are top tier. And I should mention that I've never actually felt them physically scuffing against the case. The D-pad is absolutely great. It is also membrane based with a great amount of pivot and a very thunky membraney feel. And in my experience there haven't been many, if any, accidental diagonals. I do think the edges of the D-pad are a little bit sharp, which can get tiring after a while, but overall I'd say this is great. I have no problems playing Ducktail without crouching by accident, and no trouble throwing fireballs in Street Fighter either. The shoulder buttons here are a little bit odd, but I do like them a lot. They're small and inline, keeping the device compact, but they have a strange mouse click that's almost pingy. It feels fine to me though, and they're very responsive. You can easily reach L2 and R2 without having to reach or stretch, whether you're using the analog sticks or the D-pads. So all in all, I'd say that the controls here are really good. The only real weak link I would say are the inline shoulders by their nature, and maybe the analog stick snapping too, but neither of these are a tremendous problem. And overall I find this device very fun to play on. But before we get into gaming, let's talk about the screen. And this 4-inch, 4:3 aspect ratio, 640 by 480 pixel display is really lovely. It has really great colors, and honestly there's just something really nice about playing retro games on a handheld with the correct aspect ratio screen. So that goes from anything like Sega Mega Drive, Dreamcast, N64, PS1, everything just kind of looks great. And I've really started to notice that for me personally, I always prefer playing games on a perfectly matched screen, whether that's playing a PSP game on a 16:9 screen, or a retro game on a 4:3 screen like this. It's just a much more kind of authentic and fulfilling experience in my opinion. In general, when you're playing on the RG405M, you'll have no issues with the screen, and it's really nice to see 4:3 at 4 inches. However, the screen itself isn't quite perfect, and one of the biggest issues I've come across is the brightness. It just doesn't really get anywhere near as bright as some other handhelds I own. It's completely and utterly fine if you're playing indoors, but if you plan to play outdoors you might have a little trouble seeing the screen. On the other hand, the screen gets incredibly, almost absurdly dim, which makes it very good for playing in low light conditions. And the next issue may just be my unit, but it is kind of unfortunate, and that's that mine has actually developed a bright spot. If you look on the left hand side of the screen in the middle, you'll just see a very slight bright spot. I'm not sure what's causing this, but it looks like something pressing onto the display. I haven't taken this apart or anything like that, so your guess is as good as mine as to what's causing it. But honestly, I only really noticed it when I was looking really closely at the screen to make this video, so I guess it's not a big problem. And it may just be this one unit. Anyway, when it comes to retro gaming, the 405M is pretty much the perfect and most flexible retro gaming device out there, if the majority of what you want to do is to play 4:3 games. It's powerful enough to play absolutely everything, from all of your retro systems, such as Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, all the way up to PS1, Dreamcast, N64, and Saturn without breaking too much of a sweat, if any at all. And these games just look absolutely wonderful thanks to that big and beautiful and well-suited screen. The controls are all just great when you start playing. Sometimes I have trouble playing a game like Sonic Adventure 2 if the analog stick snaps to diagonals, but I didn't really have much of an issue here, I was able to play it just fine. and whether you're using the sticks or the D-pad or the shoulder buttons, everything is well within reach and perfectly compact enough to be comfortable. Everything just feels well suited and natural, and all types of game are great on this handheld across a variety of consoles, and the experience is often superior to other handhelds thanks to the quality build, the great controls, and of course the lovely screen. Also, the T618 processor here really doesn't break a sweat with any of your retro systems. I was even able to play God of War Ghost of Sparta on PSP, without any slowdown at all. However, I didn't really want to play it since it's not very well suited to the screen, but it does work, and it's a testament to this chipset's power. Of course, being a T618, it can play a handful of higher end games on GameCube and PS2, but I would strongly advise you not to get your hopes up for these systems. Some games will run well, but the T618 never was and never will be powerful enough to play any of these systems properly. I started by playing Sonic Heroes and I thought it was going really well, until I got hit by an enemy and there were more rings on screen and then suddenly everything slowed to a crawl. But a game like Gradius 5 on PlayStation 2 was okay, and then something like Virtual Fighter 4 didn't work at all. So really just hold your expectations onto the lower end and just be happy if something does work. But certainly do not buy this device just to play GameCube or PS2. When it comes to native gaming, the Anbernic RG405M does fairly well, but only really in simple games. For example, Horizon Chase. But as soon as you get onto the more complicated stuff, it kind of falls apart pretty quickly. Also, it does seem like the T618 struggles to keep up in Android games once you get onto the higher end. There's also an issue that many Android games do not scale correctly to the 4:3 screen. In general, I would say this is definitely an emulation device and not an Android native gaming device. By the way, there's one thing about the 405M that I really don't like, and that is the audio quality. It is just simply not very good. It sounds very washed out at high volumes, and very tinny at lower volumes. It's kind of to the level where the audio is just kind of distracting and not very pleasant. So I tend to play this with headphones or in silence. When it comes to software, the RG405M ships with Android, and Anbernic's Android build is, well, pretty awful, all things considered. The biggest crime of it is an over-sharpening issue on the screen, and it's definitely more noticeable in the user interface, especially when you have a bright white image on screen, such as in a menu. But it does also show up in games. For example, when I was playing DuckTales, Screech just kind of had this white halo effect around him. It just looks really bad. And the thing I find most unforgivable about this is that this device has had several system updates and it still isn't fixed. And Android's newer devices like the 405V have the same problem. It's just really bad and it's not really acceptable. But thankfully Gamma OS is available for this device, which is an absolutely amazing custom firmware. Gamma OS improves the battery life, it improves the performance, there is no over-sharpening issue, it's fast and minimal, has no bloatware, and has some really thoughtful features like changing the way the controls respond, being able to disable analog sticks, and stuff like that. And overall, I would say there's no choice here. If you want the RG405M, you have to learn how to install Gamma OS, because the stock software is just really not good. And Gamma OS is so substantially better, they should just license it and pay the guy to have it officially. Anyway, by the way, I also got this additional grip to go with the 405M. It sacrifices the beautiful looks and compact build for whatever the heck this monstrosity is. It is much more comfortable to hold with the grip on, but I have to say I just don't like it. Maybe I would like it more if it was black to match the rest of the handheld, and if it wasn't slowly but definitively yellowing. But personally, I prefer the compact build of the RG405M by itself, and I don't find it to be uncomfortable in any way. I do have smaller hands though, so maybe that's why. Still, a grip is available if you want it, and the design itself is pretty good. And well, that's the Anbernic RG405M. I'm not surprised that this was a hugely popular when it launched in 2023. And I do still think that going into 2024 it's a fantastic handheld. And if your goal is a compact device with a very retro yet luxurious feeling, I don't think you can really go wrong with the 405M. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a device that's outclassed anytime soon, simply because it plays everything it should be able to play with flying colors, conquers everything up to Dreamcast and Saturn, and has great build quality alongside a really nice screen for retro gaming. Anyway, let's go over my overall likes and dislikes, and then I'll wrap up with a final summary. Starting with my likes, I really like the luxurious build. Even though I might prefer a plastic version of this device, I'm still glad the metal version exists. And just as a showcase item, that's really good. I like the controls, I think they're very well positioned, they all respond well and work well enough. I like that it's very compact. I mean, this thing is tiny when compared to basically any other handheld. And is also smaller than other devices that have smaller screens, which is pretty impressive. Speaking of the screen, it is overall beautiful and I love the size and the aspect ratio. I think the T618 is a perfect power level for this device and it conquers all retro gaming. It's the perfect choice for this type of handheld. And I think the battery life is also really good. It usually lasts a week or so on standby, which is great. And it feels very old school, yet with all the modern fixings of a retro handheld. And I'll expand on this point in just a moment. But for now, my dislikes. First of all, the stock software is extremely bad. You definitely shouldn't use it. I think Anbernic's over-sharpening issue is horrendous. Next is that the device is just too heavy for its size, which just makes it less portable and less comfortable than it should be. Next is that the speakers are really bad. There's no two ways about it. I think they're pretty darn awful actually. Again, the metal shell can be very cold to the touch after sitting for a while. It's not a huge problem, but it's just kind of uncomfortable. Overall, I love the RG405M a lot more than I thought I would. And I really think that this is one of the best actual modern yet retro gaming focused handhelds on the market. I almost feel like this device is how handhelds would have progressed naturally if we had never made the jump to 16:9 screens. In fact, in a way, it kind of feels to me like a portable PS1. I'm not exactly sure why PS1 specifically, maybe because PS1 games are so perfect on this handheld. In fact, with PS1 specifically, you get pixel perfect 2D graphics and super sharp upscaled 2x resolution. It really is an excellent device for PS1 JRPGs. Despite all that though, the RG405M does have a few shortcomings like the stock software and the speakers, but for purely playing 4x3 retro systems from Dreamcast and below, it really shines as an absolutely fantastic device. And that's about it for this one. Let me know what you think about the RG405M in the description box below, and whether you think it's still worth it going into 2024. And there's definitely a lot of competition, isn't there? I also want to say a huge thanks to you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please go ahead and leave a like on it, and subscribe to Retro Breeze for more content just like this. I have tons of handheld reviews coming up, which you don't want to miss. And that's this one done. Thank you very much for watching Retro Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.